Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This is the lesson on executing, monitoring, and controlling resources, Part 4. Here's where we are so far in our resource management knowledge area. We've already covered plan resource management and estimate activity resources from the planning process group, and we've now covered the executing process group's processes of acquire resources, develop team, and manage team. And now we come to the final process in this knowledge area, the monitoring and controlling process of control resources. It's important to note that the control resources process is only about the physical resources. It does not include controlling team members, because that's handled in the managed team process. So you see, in this knowledge area, we have combined physical resources and team members, but we do have a couple of separate processes for managing and controlling them. Control resources is just about physical resources. It ensures that your resources are assigned as they should be, they're allocated and available when they need to be, and when you're done with them, they're released at the right time and place in order to avoid delays. Control resources also measures planned versus actual when it comes to costs and schedule and so on, and takes corrective action as needed. The control resources process is responsible for monitoring resource expenditures. And so you can see that it would be closely related with the monitor and control project work process that is part of the integration knowledge area. Control resources is also responsible for identifying and dealing with any shortages or surpluses that you have with your resources, ensuring that resources are used when and as they should be, and that they're released when they're planned to be released and when they're no longer needed, that you are informing the appropriate stakeholders of any issues that are related to resources and their availability and utilization on the project. Control resources is also responsible for proactively influencing the factors that can affect resource utilization. In the sense you may be working with the risk management processes in identifying areas in which resource utilization could be at risk or could be optimized. Control resources also manages the changes to resource management as they occur. And all changes to the baseline have to be done through change requests that need to follow the perform integrated change control process. The primary inputs to your control resources process start with work performance data, which comes from your direct and managed project work, which will give you details about the utilization of resources and how well they're being used and if they're being used according to the schedule. Also, your physical resource assignments, resource breakdown structure, and resource requirements that are sort of your baseline of details about the amount and type and location of needed resources. Also, your project schedule, which indicates when and where these resources are needed. Your issue log, that includes any information that is related specifically to resource issues, such as delays in getting the resources you need, or a lack of resources, or not getting the right quality of resources. Your risk register and your lessons learned register. Also your resource management plan, of course, because that includes your plans and guidelines for how you're going to control resources, as well as any existing agreements that are in place that you need to be consistent with when you're managing your resources, and some organizational process assets. Your organizational process include your policies organizationally regarding how resources will be controlled and assigned to your project, as well as how they'll be released when you're done. any escalation procedures for handling resource-related issues, and your lessons learned repository that has information about resource issues that have come up in the past. Tools and techniques for the control resources process start off with some data analysis tools, such as performance reviews, because these will compare planned versus actual resource utilization, costs, and schedule, and so on, to see how well these match up to what you'd planned. Trend analysis, which is also related to performance reviews, but is specifically targeted towards showing you, especially graphically, whether performance of these resources is getting better or worse, so you can forecast this trend. As you do these forecasts, you may decide that you need to take some corrective actions, and so you'll use alternatives analysis to consider different possible corrective actions, and comparing alternatives such as, are you going to increase costs in order to get done on time, or are you going to delay the schedule in exchange for not having to increase costs? And this is where cost-benefit analysis can come in handy as well, as you evaluate the costs and benefits of various corrective actions. You'll also need to use some problem-solving skills, and it's best if you have a nice structured approach for this. You'll need some interpersonal and team skills, such as negotiation and influencing, particularly when not only acquiring these resources, but in making sure they're allocated and used as planned, or in coming up with corrective actions and having those implemented. And you also have your project information management system that may include some tools to help you do these analyses and to control these resources. When it comes to problem solving, it's best to follow some structured steps or a methodology that will help you go through this process most effectively. For example, the first thing you might do is have the step of identifying the problem, rather than jumping ahead and trying to come up with solutions before you fully understand the problem. Take the time to really identify what the problem is, and then define it more clearly. You can use some decomposition to break this problem down into its component parts. And then take the time to investigate and collect some actual data, rather than making a decision based on secondhand information or fear. Make sure you've got data to support your decisions. Then take this data and analyze it, and use some root cause analysis to find out what the root cause of this problem is. Only then can you come up with an adequate solution that you can be confident in order to solve this problem. And then don't forget this final step of coming back later and checking to make sure the solution had the desired effects, and if it didn't, reiterating through this process. The primary output of the control resources process is work performance information, specifically that information that compares planned versus actual resource utilization, costs, schedule, and so on, and all sorts of resource performance information that can be used in reports to stakeholders. You can also have some change requests based on things that come up in order to make changes to things that have baselined and are under change management, such as updates to your project management plan's resource management, schedule, and cost baselines, as well as updates to other project documents such as the resource assignments and resource breakdown structure, because as you have resources change unexpectedly, you may need to make some changes to these. Also, any updates to your assumption log and risk register need to be done here, and your lessons learned register, so that in later iterations of controlling resources, you can take advantage of these lessons. How much do you remember of the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs of control resources? The main input is work performance data, specifically data, raw data, about how resources have been used, what's been their utilization, how much have they actually cost, have they been used on time, or have they been late or early, and so on. This is then compared to your plans that you have in your resource requirements, your resource breakdown structure and your project schedule, your physical resource assignments, and you use the rules that are in your resource management plan to guide the combination of this information to compare it. And you also have some existing agreements that you may need to follow as you determine how to control resources. You'll also want to consider any issues that have come up regarding resources and lessons learned from earlier on in the project, as well as risks from your risk register. The main tools that you'll use to combine and evaluate all this information, all of this data, is data analysis, in which you generate performance reviews and trend analysis, consider alternatives, and use cost-benefit analysis to evaluate those alternatives. Using problem-solving skills, especially a methodology or a structured approach. Interpersonal and team skills, and your project management information system. The main output is work performance information, which is this data that's been analyzed and is useful for reports to your stakeholders. And change requests to make any needed changes to your project management plan or other documents, such as updating documents to show changes in your physical resource assignments or actual resources in your resource breakdown structure. This lesson has covered the 4 resource management processes across 2 process management groups. Executing includes acquire resources, develop team, and manage team, while monitoring and controlling includes control resources, which remember is only about physical resources. And now it's time for a little quiz that covers all of the parts or processes of this lesson. We start with this question. Which of the following is the most relevant organizational process asset to consider when acquiring resources? A. Marketplace conditions. B. Geographical locations. C. Resource availability. Or D. Organizational policies. What do you think? The answer is D. Organizational policies. This one is a little tricky because all of these things are important things to consider when acquiring resources, but only one of them is an organizational process asset. The other 3 are enterprise environmental factors. So this is an example of one of those questions in which it's critical to know the difference between enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. Organizational process assets are organizational policies and knowledge bases, whereas everything else that is either internal or external to the organization that can influence your project is considered an enterprise environmental factor. Our next quiz question is, which of the following is the source for the steps of forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning? A. Maslow's hierarchy. B. Tuckman ladder. C. Theory Y. Or D. Herzberg's theory. The answer is B. The Tuckman ladder, which started with forming, storming, norming, and performing, and later adjourning was added to this. Next we have this question. Which theory treats people like they're inherently motivated? A. Theory X. B. Theory Y. C. Theory Z. Or D. Motivation hygiene theory. The answer is B. Theory Y. This is the one that considers people inherently self-motivated and interested in furthering their careers and their education and knowledge and pursuing excellence. Next we have, which theory asserts that people's most basic needs must be satisfied before they're motivated to achieve at higher levels? A. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. B. Tuckman's ladder. C. Theory X. Or D. Theory Y. The answer is A. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've already covered Tuckman's ladder, which is about forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, as well as Theory X, which is about people not being motivated, and Theory Y about people being inherently self-motivated. So that leaves just Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you could answer this question by a process of elimination. On the other hand, you could remember that Maslow's hierarchy of needs has this pyramid shape in which those needs at the bottom have to be satisfied before going to higher levels. Do you remember who said that you will either step forward into growth or back into safety? Was it A. Maslow, B. Tuckman, C. McGregor, or D. Uchi? The answer is Maslow. Remember that he had the pyramid, and that from his perspective, you were either moving up the pyramid into higher levels, or you were moving down, but there was no standing still. Which theory is based on the ideas of job satisfaction and job dissatisfaction? A. Motivation hygiene theory. B. Theory X. C. Theory Z. Or D. Maslow's hierarchy of needs? The answer is A. The motivation hygiene theory, in which it listed certain things that provided job satisfaction, but also some independent things that created job dissatisfaction regardless of whether or not you had the factors for job satisfaction in place. Things that, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, need to be satisfied, but not the same as Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it's two separate lists. For more information, you can consult the PMBOK guide on these pages. However, you should be aware that much of this information is not in the PMBOK guide, but is available elsewhere. But you should still expect to see it on the PMP exam. I've provided a few useful online links that you can use to learn some of this information at no cost. However, there are also many excellent books available that can provide you more information on these subjects. Although there are many excellent books on this subject, the first one that I would recommend is Scrum: The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time by Jeff Sutherland, who was one of the co-creators of Scrum. This book is particularly useful because it's not too long, it's easy to read, it's packed with all sorts of excellent examples and case studies, and it's non-technical, so you can share this with all sorts of people from all different walks of life and all different parts of your organization, and they shouldn't have any trouble with reading it and understanding it. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.